teacher Hawa. I'm here to take you through the English lesson for today. The last time I was here, we were looking at electronic media and we looked at the vocabulary for radio and television. That is the first subtopic under electronic media. So today we want to look at language structures, but what we are looking at specifically we have already learned, so it is some kind of revision almost. So we are looking at conditional sentences. We are looking at conditional sentences. Why do we call them conditional sentences? It's because in such sentences we talk about a condition that must be fulfilled in order to get a certain result. And those sentences are also called if sentences. They are also called if sentences. They are also called if sentences. So we have conditional sentences, or if one. In the primary 5 we looked at the if one, and we said that if one takes if one takes if plus present simple, if plus present simple, if plus present simple plus shall or will. If plus present simple, if plus present simple plus future simple. If plus present simple plus future simple. Let's look at these examples of such sentences here. Let's look at examples of such sentences. I want to give you an example. Example A says, if my father gets money, he will buy. If my father gets money, he will buy a radio. If my father gets money, he will buy a radio. Now, when you look at this sentence, we take it to be in if one. If one. Why? Because it takes the present simple, and then the future simple. Now remember that in the primary 6 we talked about clauses. Even in P7, a clause is a part of a sentence. Clauses may be separated by commas, or they may be separated by conjunctions or any other words. So here we have got 2 clauses. This is the first clause, then we have a comma, and we have another clause here. Now when you look at the first clause, it says, if my father gets money. That clause where we have the word if is called the if clause. It's called the if clause. Then this one here is called the main clause. Now, we say that a sentence is in if one if the if clause is in the present simple and the main clause is in the future simple tense. I know that this we have already learned. Let me give you another example. I want to give you another example. Another example in that tense. I mean in the if one. the DJ plays good music, I will dance. Now, the if clause reads, if the DJ plays good music, that is what we call the if clause, and the if clause is in the present simple tense. The main clause says, I will dance. The main clause is in the future simple tense. Now, these are if one sentences, like we've learned in our previous classes. But we may decide to use if in the middle. We may decide to use the if in the middle by saying that my father will buy a radio if he gets money. In part B, we shall say, I will dance if the DJ plays good music. Whenever we start our sentence with if, we must have a comma in the middle. Whenever we start our sentence with if, we must have a comma in the middle. Now, since this one is just a revision of what we learned in our P5 and our P6, I want us to try out these. To try out these before we go to the next step. To try out these. Sentences beginning if. So our number one. Don't play loud music. Don't play loud music. Play loud music, your neighbors will complain. Rewrite the following sentences beginning if. So I want you to rewrite this sentence beginning if. In number two. Number two says, parents must guide their children, or else they will get spoiled. Parents must guide their children. Parents must guide their children, or else they will get spoiled. Then in three, we have turn on the TV. Turn on the TV. Turn on the TV set now. Turn on the TV now and watch. You know, watch the going to have two sentences. Using if. Always remember that when we use if at the beginning, we must use a comma, but when we use it in the middle, we don't need the comma. Alright. So in question 4, we are using if in the middle. This is just revision. You must adjust that area. We must adjust the area. To see the pictures. You must adjust the area to see the pictures clearly. You must adjust the area to see the pictures clearly. Number 5. Number 5. Number 5. I have to go to the radio. I have to go to the radio station. I have to go to the radio station to see. I have to go to the radio station to see the presenters. I have to go to the radio station to see the presenters. So we are going to try out these 5 questions. 3 you're beginning with if. The 2 you are using if in the middle. But we say that this is revision. And in our previous class, when we looked at the use of ifs, we also looked at the use of unless. So we are going to look at the use of unless as well. We are going to look at the use of unless as well. I hope you finished copying at least number 1. Let's look at the use of unless. So we are looking at conditional sentences in if 1. Conditional sentences in if 1. We learned or we know that unless means if not. Unless means if not. You must always have that in mind before you write your sentences using unless. I'll give you an example here. Example. Let's go back to our example that we looked at. If my father gets money, if my father gets money, he will he will buy a radio. If my father gets money, he will buy a radio. Candidates, we want to rewrite. We want to rewrite the sentence. Beginning. We want to rewrite the sentence. Beginning unless. We want to rewrite beginning unless. What do you think the answer is? What is the answer? We want to rewrite beginning unless. And remember that when we write beginning unless, we must also include a comma in our sentence. Okay, if my father gets money, he will buy a radio. What is your answer? Okay, let me write the correct answer to see if that is the answer that you also have. If my father gets money, he will buy a radio. Our answer will be, they've told us to write beginning unless, so we shall write unless my father gets money, unless my father gets money, comma, unless my father gets money, he will not, unless my father gets money, he will not buy a radio. Unless my father gets money, he will not buy a radio. Candidates, I told you that whenever you use unless, always remember in your mind that it means if not. And the sentence you write in your answer, the sentence you write in your answer must bring out the meaning in the question. That means you must understand what the word unless means before you use it. We said unless means if not. For me, I normally tell people that after writing your answer, before you actually write it here, first write the answer aside and then fit in these words, if not, to see if you come out with the meaning that is in the question. So we want to fit in these words, if not, to see if we come out with the same meaning. So where we have the word unless, is where we directly replace if. So what you do, you get your pencil, write if where unless is. So if my father, now we want to place not somewhere. If my father does not get money, he will not buy a radio. If my father does not, because we cannot say that if my father not get money. So we shall say, if my father does not get money, he will not buy a radio. Okay? Does this meaning bring out what we have here? The question says, if my father gets money, he will buy a radio, meaning that if he does not get it, he will not buy the radio. Therefore, when you try out this and find that it brings out the same meaning as what is given in the question, then your answer is correct. Many of us get confused when we use unless. But the moment you try to understand that unless means if not, and you get to know where to fit this if and the not to bring out the exact meaning in the question, then your answer is correct. Children, we learn content, but we also look for marks. Never underestimate a mark. That one mark adds on to your 94 to make it a 95. That one mark adds on to your 84 to make it an 85. So we must always try out with this unless you are very sure that what you have in the answer is correct. But for me, I'm not always very sure. So what I do, I get side work, I first write the answer that I think is correct, then I try out with if not. Now this if not must be used in the clause, in the if clause, not in the main clause. Or the main clause is that one where we have the future simple tense. So in the if clause, of course, is where you try out the if and the not to check whether you have the correct answer. Let's now look at another example. Let's look but before we go to another example, what if the examiner now tells us in B, this is our example 1. In B, the examiner tells us, to rewrite. In B, the examiner tells us to rewrite using unless. Rewrite using unless. So in the first question, you use unless at the beginning. In the second question, they are asking you to use unless in the middle. What will our answer be, candidates? What will the answer be? Our answer is going to be, he will not buy, our answer is going to be, my father will not buy a radio. My father will not buy a radio unless. My father will not buy a radio unless he gets. My father will not buy a radio unless he gets money. When we use unless in the middle, we don't need the comma. Remember we said that when we're in primary 4, in primary 3, because there are very few sentences where we had to use commas, we even knew them, that when a sentence begins with while, when, as, you use a comma. When you go on P5, P6, P7, you may not even tell because there are so many, but when you speak, you must be able to fill the comma to know a sentence that takes a comma. For example, here, when I say, unless my father gets money, I fill the comma as I speak, so I'll know that I need to put a comma there. So the business of cramming and what have your question will come. We did not talk about it, but when you speak and you feel that there must be a comma there, you place the comma there. So the idea of cramming, which word, which structure takes a comma, we normally limit that when we come to the higher classes. Why? Because there are many situations where you will need a comma, so you cannot cram everything. What you need to do is understand where the comma should be placed as you say out a sentence. We want to look at another example in if 1. Another example in if 1 where we are going to use unless. Another example in if 1 where we are going to use unless. I told you that this is simply revision. It is part of electronic media, but we know that in P5, in P6, we looked at if 1. That is why instead of looking at if 1 alone, we also bring in the use of unless, because unless is normally used with if sentences. Okay, let's look at example 2. Example 2. Example 2. Example 2. If he turns the knob, if he turns the knob, he will. If he turns the knob, he will increase. If he turns the knob, he will increase the volume. If he turns the knob, he will increase the volume. We want to rewrite this using unless. We want to rewrite using unless. So what are our instructions in A? Our instructions in A are saying, rewrite beginning unless. Rewrite beginning unless. Candidate, what is your answer? Think about the answer, try it out, replace with if not, and see if you come out with the meaning that you have in the question. The meaning that is given in the question. The words may not be exactly the same because of course we have to replace unless. We have to replace if with unless, but the meaning must be the same. Okay. Now, let me write the answer to see if you have the same answer as mine. If he turns the knob, we will increase the volume. Unless he turns the knob, he will not increase the volume. Unless he turns the knob, he will not increase the volume. What if the question had asked us to rewrite using unless in the middle? What would our answer be? It would be, he will not increase the volume unless he turns the knob. Now, a simple activity still. A simple activity where we are using unless. Rewrite in A beginning unless. In B, rewrite using unless. So what are you going to do, candidate? You're going to have two answers for each question. In part A, you're beginning your answer with unless, and in part B, you're beginning your answer, you're using unless in the middle. Each question must have two answers. Part A, beginning with unless, part B, using unless in the middle. So what is our number one? Our number one. You will have two answers for each. If I get part number 3, doctors.